Okay,
Well,
you're good.
Good to go. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, or OWEB, Committee for Water and Climate. My name is Jamie McLeod-Skinner, and I am a co-chair along with Bruce. We wanted to welcome everyone to this December 13th, 2023 meeting. Want to remind everyone that this is being live streamed on YouTube, on OWEB's YouTube channel, and being recorded for posterity to capture the great insights that we hear from staff and from members of the public. So those of you who are interested in following along with the meeting, you can go to OWEB's website and look and to find the materials for this meeting. If you look towards the bottom of the page, you can click on the relevant committee. Again, in this case, it's the Water and Climate Committee, and link to the meeting materials for this meeting and also for past meetings as well. And so why don't we start out by introducing ourselves. I know there's some members of the public with us on this meeting. Welcome. I'll mention a little bit later how we will be welcoming public engagement, but let's start with an introduction of OWEB staff and committee members. And Stephanie, why don't we start with you?
Great. Good morning, everybody. Stephanie Page, Acting Executive Director at OWEB.
And welcome in that new capacity. Delighted that you're in that role. Jesse, you're next.
Good morning, everybody. Jesse Kirschner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator at OWEB.
Thanks, Jesse. Audrey.
Thank you. Audrey Hatch, Conservation Outcomes Coordinator on OWEB staff.
Thank you. Steve.
Steve Brandt, representing Oregon State University Extension on the board.
Thank you. Eric.
Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, Policy Coordinator at OWEB.
Bruce.
Good morning. Bruce Buckmaster, Public Member of the Board and Co-Chair of this august committee.
Excellent. Lindsay.
Good morning, everybody. Lindsay McClary, Public at-Large Voting Member on the OWEB Board. I live in West Salem and I work for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde.
Thank you, Lindsay. And just as an FYI, the sound is a little bit weak on your receiver, just so you know. Renee.
Good morning, everyone. Renee Davis, Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager at OWEB.
Thank you. And Dan.
Good morning, everybody. Dan Brown. I am ex officio member from the Environmental Protection Agency and live in Portland, Oregon.
Thank you so much. And Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure, Jamie. Thank you. Nicole Bettinardi, Board Liaison and Executive Assistant.
Thank you so much. And appreciate, actually, Lindsay, a good reminder. So both actually, Bruce and I are members at large on the board. And I'm based in Central Oregon. Thank you, those of us who joined as members of the public. What we will be doing, I'll do a quick review of the agenda, but wanted to say specifically about public comments. We've been working very hard to engage the public more in these conversations. As you may have seen from an email going out, we welcome comments that are received ahead of time that can be referenced, written comments that can be referenced in the meeting, but also really welcome folks to attend the meeting. And we'll have that later in the agenda, but want to welcome that input. And we'll be looking at about a 3-minute time limit just to make sure that we're able to get in all the content from the meeting, but really delighted to have your input. And then just wanted to, well, we'll get to that later in the session. So on the agenda for today, again, these materials are available on the website. We want to talk about, we've been talking a lot about agency coordination. So today is more of a deep dive into some of the coordination between OWEB and DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality. Then we'll talk about some of the climate trainings and resources that were a follow-up from the climate resolution we had. So those resources that are made available to our public partners. And we'll get an update on OWEB's strategic plan, which is being modified and updated. And then also a real important point is the intersectionality between both OWEB committees, but also some of those interagency activities as well. So there'll be some report outs on that. And then we'll have our public comment period. And then for the good of the order, we typically talk about some of the potential topics for the future. And with that, thanks everyone. Let's kick it off with the interagency coordination piece. I'll turn it over to Stephanie to discuss the intersectionality, if you will, between OWEB and DEQ.
Great. Good morning again, everyone. I want to thank one of our colleagues from Oregon DEQ, Steve Mrazek, for joining us this morning. Steve did email me and mention that his camera and audio are not working, and I don't know if that's an issue on his end or our end, but just wanted to flag that, Nicole, in case there's anything we can do on our end to give him access. So Steve is, I think, the watershed section manager at DEQ. Hopefully I got your title correct, Steve, and a really important partner to OWEB. He and his team work on total maximum daily load development, on a variety of other water quality issues, and they work extremely closely with agency partners. So we're very excited to have him in this role. He's been with DEQ for a while and want to thank him for joining us today. So just a little background on this coordination item. Going back a couple of committee meetings, we had a great presentation from other DEQ colleagues about a program, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and the possible role that the program could play in addressing emerging contaminants, such as the tire chemicals that the committee has been discussing. And so that presentation just led to an interest in exploring more broadly the connections that OWEB has with key state natural resource agencies and our agency partners. And so this morning, we're going to go through a crosswalk of some of the different ways that OWEB and DEQ collaborate. So I'll go through a few areas here where we connect closely with DEQ, and then Jesse and Audrey will also cover some areas. And if we can get Steve's video and audio working, I'll ask him to comment at the end of my remarks about the collaboration from DEQ's perspective. And I'm seeing from Nicole, it sounds like it might be an issue on Steve's end. Maybe, Steve, it would be good to drop off and drop back on and hop back on. That sometimes that can help resolve something like this. So just to start on some of the ways that we collaborate between OWEB and DEQ, a lot of the collaboration occurs in interagency groups that meet around coordination at multiple levels in state government. So one of those is the Water Corps team. This is an interagency team of natural resource agencies, as well as public health and other agencies that touch water, such as Business Oregon and the Oregon Department of Transportation. We talk about specific water issues going on within agencies, and we also collaborate and coordinate on things like budget requests and policy issues during the biennium, and we prepare recommendations to the agency directors. Agency directors also coordinate within the natural resource agencies, and OWEB and DEQ are both a part of that group. In fact, I am going to have to hop off this morning at 10 o'clock, this committee meeting, to attend the natural resource agency directors meeting, which is a really important platform for interagency coordination. So that is another group that we both sit on. Another way that OWEB and DEQ collaborate is that we've got an Environmental Quality Commission representative position on our board. So that position has been filled by Molly Kyle and Greg Addington most recently. So those are a couple of names that I would think all of you would recognize. I also wanted to mention, let's see, I think Steve did hop off, and so is hopefully in the process of hopping back on. Steve and I, and actually Steve's predecessor, Jean Foster, and I have a monthly check-in on areas of mutual interest to our agencies. So we've talked about things like the new water acquisitions grant program, when OWEB received the infusion of additional funding into that grant program, for example. So those are some areas where we collaborate, I would say, at the executive or the manager level, as well as the board level. One other thing I wanted to mention before I see if Steve's able to comment is that, and you'll hear this theme throughout Jesse's and Audrey's items too, DEQ is an important source of information of subject matter expertise on a variety of topics for us. And so I want to encourage us to use our agency partners to be that source of subject matter expertise. And I think that another area where we will likely engage with DEQ is on tire chemicals, some of the treatment options and research available. And even if DEQ doesn't have that expertise in-house, they typically know who we can connect with to get that information as a trusted, neutral source. So I just wanted to share that that theme weaves throughout some of the details that you'll hear about from Jesse and Audrey. So I'm going to see if I think Steve doesn't have his camera on, so I'm guessing he might still be having issues, but I'm going to see if we're able to hear him. He's saying sorry, he still can't turn on his camera. Let me see if I can override. I'm going to do an ask to unmute here as a co-host. Ask to start video and ask to unmute, and it doesn't seem to be responding. Sorry, Steve. All right, so I'll turn it over to Jesse, and I'll keep trying to work with Steve on the side here and see if we can get that going.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I'm going to talk about a number of different ways in which we collaborate and coordinate with DEQ, but one of the things I just want to say right off the bat is just, it's not just these two agencies that are having the conversation. Oh, he made it. There's a lot of other state agencies. So I will stop right now and give Steve a chance to chime in.
Welcome, Steve.
My goodness. Good morning, everybody. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what was going on there. I got the little prompt, Stephanie, when you just said to unmute me and clicked on it. So anyway, totally apologies. But absolutely, I guess I will just say my name is Steve Mrazek. I manage the watershed management group at our DEQ headquarters, and just, the collaboration with OWEB over the years in so many areas, whether it's, policy and strategy related, whether it's funding related, whether it's just, how we collect data across the state to kind of help answer questions and align our priorities. It's just tremendously valuable. And just what OWEB brings, I think, to kind of leadership of bringing multiple agencies together and helping discuss, where those priorities are, what types of information we can each bring to those situations to, kind of most efficiently kind of focus our efforts, particularly on a lot of the on-the-ground projects. Just tremendously beneficial, I think, for Oregon. And again, our focus is certainly water quality, at least in the programs that I'm most connected to. And so, again, and I apologize because I think I was off and Stephanie was stepping through some things, so she might have already said some of this stuff. But I mean, whether it's just the work that's part of again, the funding pieces, whether it's the SIAs, whether it's 319 funding, whether I think probably talked a little bit about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and opportunities I think that are continuing to kind of emerge and align right there. I think with a lot of the review teams, I know that DEQ and many others participate in. And just, again, back to the grants, I think just the leadership on how OWEB kind of implements that. I mean, procedurally, I know iteratively, they're continually going through, ways to kind of deliver kind of as rapidly as possible, as efficiently and equitably, and how they review things. It's great to, I think, get that feedback on how they've accomplished that, and then we attempt as well to bring it to our programs as well. So maybe I'll just stop right there. I don't know if I just want to say a couple things. I haven't been to one of these meetings before. It's just really honestly a pleasure. I get together with Stephanie periodically and she was mentioning this was coming up. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'd love to be there. I haven't been there. So I'll stop because I don't want to occupy all the time.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Thanks for taking the time to be here and pushing through some of those little technological bumps we had. I wanted to, I'll acknowledge Stephanie first, and then after Stephanie, I want to open up to board members if there's specific questions you have for either our team or the DEQ team. Stephanie, please.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jamie. And thanks, Steve. That worked out just great. So it's okay. We're all used to pivoting when there are technical issues. So one thing I wanted to ask you, if you could talk about a little more, is the 319 funding, because I do think that is an important complementary source of funding to what OWEB provides. And just for everybody's information, it's funding for non-point source pollution and water quality projects. But I'll let Steve talk about that in a little more detail. And I think just an important way our work complements each other.
Absolutely. No, thanks for the prompt, Stephanie. So DEQ implements kind of the 319 program for the state of Oregon. So that's grants that are provided through EPA for non-point source activities around the state. We have an annual RFP that we put out for that. And again, while the grants aren't necessarily large grants, they're so important to help serve as kind of either a catalyst or partner with other grant sources. I think everybody's really familiar with this. There's different funding sources, and it's really essential that often, from my observations, those groups kind of figure out how to package this up, because oftentimes each individual grant may or may not have the full support necessary to complete the project. And so again, it's really, really essential. And a non-point source, I think we all can appreciate, there's just lots of opportunities, I think, to continue to get that accelerated restoration on the ground. And I think the more we can, again, align where those opportunities are on the landscape with our funding sources, and where those opportunities and individuals on the ground are also available to kind of execute those, it's tremendously important. So again, the 319 program, we have an annual cycle, work closely, I know, with OWEB and other watershed councils, and there's all sorts of individuals that can apply for these. So anyway, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And for members of the public who are not as familiar, actually, before I say that, I'll just also welcome Meg Reeves, another committee member, OWEB board member and member of the committee. Per Steve's comment, there's sometimes both for OWEB and DEQ, semi-state, but often federal funding that gets routed through the state and implemented through state agencies for specific programs. I'd like to really open it up to, and thank you again, Stephanie and Steve, for your presentation, open up to board members. I know there's sometimes questions about both that interconnectedness, but also those funding sources. So any questions from board members on this presentation? And Meg, we're on the first agenda item on the OWEB and DEQ presentation.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm late.
Not at all.
And Jamie, just so you're aware, Audrey and I both have some other ways in which we collaborate with DEQ that we wanted to share as well.
Okay, seeing no questions, please, Jesse, if you and Audrey can jump in.
Okay, so a couple of these you will already have heard about, and so I won't spend a ton of time on them, and then we'll also be hearing about more of them later. So first, another way in which we collaborate, the Water Resources Department is undertaking the update of the Integrated Water Resources Strategy, and both OWEB and DEQ provide input into that update and continue to implement several of the actions that are in that strategy. That the IWRS is going to be a topic for a future committee meeting. We have interest from our WRD partners to come and share that, so just flagging that for later. Another way in which we collaborate, and you'll hear more about this later as well, is through the new Drinking Water Source Protection Grant Program. DEQ is going to be providing technical input and information about complementary funding to this in the development of the OWEB grant program. I think Renee and maybe Eric Hartstein will talk a little bit more about this particular program later in the agenda. Also wanted to mention House Bill 3409, which particularly the Natural and Working Lands implementation. So 3409, which was passed in the 2023 legislative session, includes a number of policy components in addition to the Natural Climate Solutions Fund. And OWEB, DEQ, Department of Energy, ODFW, Department of Land Conservation and Development, Department of Forestry, and ODA, we've begun coordinating on some of the policy components of that particular bill. Also, one of the other ways in which we coordinate with them, House Bill 3293, which was passed I think the 2021 session, relates to developing best practices for community engagement. So OWEB, WRD, DEQ, ODFW, Oregon Health Authority, and Business Oregon, these 6 agencies are coordinating on the development of best practices for community engagement related specifically to water projects. And as that gets a little bit further along, I'll be sharing more information on that particular, what that best practices document looks like and engagement around that. You have heard in the last committee meeting, I think it was in September, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund presentation that Allie Miller shared from DEQ. The only thing that I wanted to add is that I was had the opportunity to chat with one of the folks from a soil and water conservation district about that particular program. And I just wanted to mention how they have used it in the past, which is they've used the SRF funds to reloan and partially grant out to customers for conservation work. And they've also used the funds to do septic tank repair and replacement program for their whole county through that as well. So just another grantee and how they've used that. And then I think I'll stop there and turn it over to Audrey because she has a whole other list of ways in which we coordinate and collaborate with DEQ.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse, Jamie, Stephanie. So a couple funding related items, and DEQ provides really key technical input on reviewing and evaluating OWEB grant proposals. And that happens through participating in review teams. Steve mentioned this for a number of OWEB's grant programs, including the regional review teams for open solicitation grants and the Oregon Plan Monitoring Team for monitoring grants and various other specific technical review teams. DEQ regional and headquarters staff participate in these teams and really bring that specialized knowledge about water quality in a watershed context. And the reviewers also really look at the context, within the context of current conditions, and also help provide their expert opinion on the potential impacts of proposals. And there's a real significant investment of DEQ staff time and resources with each of these teams and grant cycles. The second funding item I want to touch on is also came up briefly, strategic implementation area grants. These are administered by OWEB on behalf of the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And kind of underscoring Jesse's point about the collaboration among natural resources agencies. Strategic implementation areas get focused technical assistance and monitoring funding, as well as compliance evaluation to help meet water quality goals in agricultural areas. So OWEB and DEQ are part of a 4-agency team, including also Department of Agriculture, of course, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And that team talks about how SIAs are working, the needs, challenges, and opportunities. OWEB provides funding for community engagement and SIAs to support project development. And this biennium, OWEB and the partner agencies are offering some restoration grants in a pilot program as one of the eligible uses for SIA funds. And that interagency team also provides key input to ODA regarding the selection of future SIAs. The last thing I want to mention on funding is that OWEB provides financial resources to DEQ to support the volunteer water quality program. That helps them get monitoring equipment that they loan to watershed councils, soil and water conservation districts, nonprofits, other organizations to perform water quality, really following those DEQ approved sampling and analysis plans. Finally, I'd like to hit on a couple items where OWEB and DEQ work together on monitoring and data related efforts. The first one is the Oregon Water Data Portal. This is an interagency effort currently convened by DEQ in response to really widespread public interest in having improved data and information available to support water decision making. Funding was made available by the legislature in the past biennium, 21 to 23. That resulted in a report and some detailed recommendations. And in this current biennium, 23 to 25, work is underway with that interagency team, including a broad subject matter expert team to really fully develop a pilot data portal. Related to both funding and technical collaboration and data sharing, a little bit more about why OWEB and DEQ and how OWEB and DEQ work together on those topics. OWEB really works closely with DEQ staff to make sure monitoring grantees have what they need, the information, the guidance to submit their water quality data into DEQ's data systems, and to kind of make sure that those OWEB grantees can submit sampling and analysis plans to DEQ for review, to make sure the data that they're submitting is high quality and can really be used to support decision making within the state. And so touching on two other interagency teams that OWEB and DEQ really partnered together on, the STREAM team, Strategic Enterprise Approach to Monitoring. This is a partnership with 7 natural resources agencies and really co-led by OWEB with DEQ. The purpose is to inform collaborative decision-making through coordinated planning and monitoring and communication of water-related data. An example of this team is producing some information about continuous water quality temperature. 2 other real quick items. The Conservation Effectiveness Partnership is an interagency effort with DEQ and OWEB. And the goal there is describing effectiveness of cumulative investments. And then finally, DEQ, along with other agencies, provides input into the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds reporting. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for that presentation. One of the other, if there's follow-up questions from the public, Jesse, what's the best way for members of the public to ask any further questions on this?
They can contact me and I can help refer them to whoever the appropriate person might be. But just feel free to email me, Jessie, JESSI.Kirschner, KERSHNER @oweb.oregon.gov. Excellent.
Thank you. And then one of the other questions that I'll actually defer to my colleague Bruce on, and then we can touch on this later on the potential topics for the future, is helping the public, and this is the public engagement piece, understand the integration between the different funding systems. But I'll just put a flag in that for later in the conversation. Steve, again, thank you so much for joining. You're welcome to stay on for the meeting, but thank you so much for your input. Really appreciate that. And Stephanie, thanks for leading off on this integration piece to help the public better understand how we integrate as different state agencies and work together to serve the public and be good stewards of our natural resources. Stephanie, go ahead.
Thanks, Jamie. So hopefully this was helpful to the committee. This was a little bit of an experiment. I think the first time we've gone through this type of crosswalk, and there's so many different ways that we work together that I think it can get overwhelming, frankly. So would just appreciate any feedback on whether you'd like to see further crosswalks. I think pace and workload wise, we could do one per committee meeting if that was something of interest to the committee. So I think you can just think about that for when you get to the future topics part of the agenda, but would appreciate any feedback on the form and the style and the value of having these.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we'll move on to the next agenda item, climate trainings and resources. Jesse.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen for this particular one. So hold on just one second. Okay, so hopefully you all can see my screen. It should just be OWEB's homepage that you can see. Okay, so as many of you know, the board adopted the climate rules at the July meeting, and so the climate criteria were added into our grant applications for the fall open solicitation offering. So they appeared in the restoration, technical assistance, and engagement grant offerings. And to help support our grant applicants in responding to those new criteria, we developed a number of different resources and training opportunities for folks. So I just want to direct you to where that information is and what some of that information is that we provided to everybody. So if you go to our homepage and you click on the resources tab, there's a tab on here that says climate and water resources. And it takes you to a page which has all of the different resources that we have created to help applicants in responding to the new criteria. On this page, we have a recorded virtual webinar that we led with our grant applicants. We also, although it's not shown on here, Eric Hartstein and I and some other OWEB staff embarked on a bit of a roadshow around the state and went to different communities and did some training with folks in those communities on how to respond to these criteria. The format of them was very similar to what you'd see in the webinar if you watched the recorded webinar. But in addition to the resources that appear here, there's also a little bit of resources sidebar. It has the climate-related technical resources that Audrey created originally to help applicants. There is what I call a quick guide that was developed to really take applicants through a step-by-step process on, what's the question that we're asking you related to climate? Where can you find the resources to help you to respond to that question? What's an example response, that we would be looking for? So it's really meant to help those folks that have little to no experience in integrating climate into their projects, really take them through that step-by-step process. And we also have the slides that were available from the training if folks just want to see the slides. The last couple of things that I'll mention, one of the things that we created was basically creating summaries for each of OWEB's regions on climate information so that applicants don't need to go searching through the peer review literature or through different reports to find that information, but instead we've done that summary for them. So for example, if you went to North Coast and clicked on climate, what it does is it takes you to all the projected changes and they can use that information directly in their grant applications and they don't need to find that on their own. So hold on just a second, let me get this back up. And then another, what we also tried to do is to create a very curated list of recommended resources and tools that folks can use. And so when they click on these, it gives you some of those curated resources and recommendations. And these are the same ones that appear in the quick guide and that are covered in the webinar so that there's a lot of overlap and crosswalk and people can see how they can use these. And we spent quite a bit of time in the trainings just walking through these different resources. One that I want to highlight that has come up before in our conversations at the committee level is this nature-based Solutions Benefits Explorer, which Bruce is quite familiar with. But this is a really amazing and very simple tool for folks to use that allows you to either enter it from thinking about a particular activity that you would implement, like for example, invasive species removal, or if you're trying to pick a particular benefit, like you want to pick a water quality benefit or adaptation and resilience as a benefit. So what you do is you just say, I have an activity I'm going to implement. It occurs in grasslands. That's my habitat type. I'm doing restoration. And then you just click Update Explorer. And there's a whole list of activities that you can select here that are commonly implemented activities. So we'll say remove invasive species. And then what it does is it highlights for you the different processes and benefits that are then generated from implementing that particular activity. So it's a really simple and straightforward tool that we recommended to our applicants to be able to use. So it highlights, for example, carbon sequestration, climate adaptation, and it's just a way for them to get a quick sense of those benefits that are generated as a result of implementing some of their activities. So let's see, with that, I'll just stop sharing my screen and just say that it was a really good, a lot of great questions and feedback from those trainings. Eric Hartstein, I don't know if you have anything to add from what we did this fall, but yeah, that's just a quick summary of the different resources and things that we created.
Well, that's excellent. And just before I get to questions, I want to give a big shout out to staff because when the board really set this as an expectation and a goal of better integrating the impacts of climate impacts on the investments we make of public funds, staff really ran with it. It follows the governor's directive to make sure we're more customer friendly and customer responsive to customers' needs. And so great job to the entire OWEB team for putting this great tool together. Bruce, do you have a question?
Thanks, Jamie. I'd like to echo the thanks to staff. I sat through the training. It was phenomenal. I have a request that Jesse, that you might consider in the resource section of the page on our website, having a link to our climate resolution. I think people might find that of benefit. Thanks.
Great ad, Bruce. Lindsay.
Thank you. No question, just a comment. Would really like to echo, this is just a great example of OWEB staff going above and beyond, setting examples and benchmarks. We're asking applicants to integrate new information into grant applications. And so this is such a great tool to support them in that and provide resources. It helps to hopefully remove or break down some barriers to folks who are applying, and also helps review team members to have some common themes and common responses instead of just leaving everybody to their own to kind of scramble and come up with information. So I'm super impressed, and I look forward to checking out the tool and hearing folks' feedback as they utilize it. So awesome.
Great comment from our grants committee also. And even further to that point, the helping to show the public this concept of investing our limited public resources into what's going to be good for our state, our natural resources, our communities. It helps to tell that story and show that's the investment being made. So really great job, Stephanie, to your entire team, and Jesse, your work on that, and Eric as well. Any other questions from board members? And thank you, Peggy, for the little celebratory emoji on that. On to OWEB strategic plan update. Eric, can you please give us an update on where we're at in our strategic plan?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Eric Williams asked me to be prepared to provide this update, and I'll go ahead and run through that real quick, and I will offer an opportunity for staff to add to any of my comments. But thank you. We wanted to give each of the committees a status update about the strategic plan refresh process, and along with the meeting materials for today, there is kind of a handout kind of summarizing the current strategic plan shifts. And so I'll refer to that as I give this quick status update. So in 2018, OWEB completed our current strategic plan. That's a 10-year strategic plan. This year in 2023, we've got some new guidance from the governor's office and an opportunity to really refresh on that strategic plan to make sure we meet those requirements from the governor's office, and also give us an opportunity to reflect on progress. So that 2018 strategic plan kind of lays out who we are and how we approach our work. And those pieces are kind of really carrying forward into the strategic plan update. What's getting some refresh is really around the strategic plan priorities, strategies, and tactics. And so what you see along with the meeting materials is a summary of kind of how the 7 strategic plan priorities from that original 2018 plan have shifted a little bit based on lots of feedback, including a really robust conversation with the OWEB board and at the October meeting, information from interested parties, grantees, and information from OWEB's customers. Really pretty broad solicitation through an online survey, as well as interviews and one-on-one conversations. And so that kind of helps us with getting clear on what we're doing with this refresh process. So Dialogues in Action is helping the OWEB team kind of phase this refresh. And that same team with Dialogues in Action helped OWEB create the 2018 plan. And the first phase that they're really helping us with, where we're completing now, is the Get Clear phase. And now we're moving into getting focused, the next phase. So kind of taking a look at that revised priority document with those shifts and thinking about what are some strategies, what are some pathways to get those to accomplish those priorities. How do we work to get that done? And so coming up, just two things. In January, there will be another session with an opportunity to continue thinking about that get focused phase and build on those strategies. And then in the future, in the spring, there'll be some more work internally and then with the board around, what are some timelines and some tactics? And this leads into the meeting the expectation to have a completed plan available to the governor's office by June. And so Jesse, Stephanie, Eric Hartstein, anything that you would like to add regarding the status update on the strategic plan refresh process?
That was great, Audrey.
Okay, and just to confirm, you mentioned the January, coming up in January, is that coming to the board meeting or is that going to be a separate public hearing? Super.
It will be a board session, approximately an hour and a half, I believe. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from board members? Steve?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone involved with this. This is clearly an evolving process. I know we had a large discussion about this in October, and I see changes have been made. I fully support all of these priorities, of course, and I think they're reasonably well thought out. But when I read it again this morning, just as a one-pager, I wondered where the water enhancement priority was. It seems like all of these priorities, maybe rightly so, relate to, except maybe the last one, relate to community engagement, and how to achieve, enhanced watershed enhancement. That's what the board is. But I don't see anything that relates specifically to watersheds itself, like improving watersheds and creating more salmon, things that relate to the actual watershed enhancement as a priority. And maybe that's an overarching goal, and under that, this is how we sort of get that. But anyway, just in isolation, it seems to me that one of the priorities ought to have something to do with the watershed itself in terms of the environment itself. Not arguing that all of the community engagement components here are not an important way to move forward in terms of enhancing watersheds. Anyway, having said that, just to think about that as we go through this, a couple of points that I'm sure we'll need to deal with is when we get to priority 2, talking about engage communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. As somewhere or another, we have to identify who those communities are. And I think that's an important first step in that process, because there's a lot of talk about engaging those communities, but I think we really need to get down and identify those communities so that we know who we're trying to engage with. And it goes unsaid that climate resilience, again, and the bottom one, sometime needs to be more explicitly defined in order to move towards a climate resilience system. You need to really get a better definition of what that means. It means it's broadly and differentially defined in a lot of different places, but I think in terms of our own priorities, what are we talking about when we're talking about more climate resilience? And I'm sure that's in the detail. I know this is just a summary, so.
Thank you, Steve. That good input, good feedback. Others, Bruce, I see you don't have you're not unmuted. Do you have something to add?
No.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. Any final comments from staff before we move on? Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Jamie. I'll just comment that that's great feedback that we heard, and that we'll talk about that as a team. And I think just two things real quick. One, I think there will be further conversation kind of around the sphere of influence, along with the strategies and tactics. Like, so which organization does what can we do? What can others do? And then just a comment, Steve, as I heard your perspective, I was thinking about some of the conversations and how this might have come to be. And I think that there's been a lot of discussion around the community engagement and the people piece being missing. And maybe you're right that there's kind of a need to link back to the mission more clearly in that one pager. So just a couple quick comments, and we'll talk about that more as a team. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey, for that as follow-up. It also, what struck me as well is there's the what and the how, and a lot of the engagement is that how piece, and then but making sure we're elevating the what to provide clarity there is our driving mission. But great comments. Thank you, everyone. Moving on in our agenda to the item number 4, so OWEB committee priorities and intersectionalities. So we often talk about this between our committees, and this is a standing agenda item because we didn't want to have committees that then pigeonhole items and not be looking at some of the intersectionality between. But it also actually ties into some of the intersectionality also with statewide agencies. And when we started this meeting talking about an intersectionality with DEQ, but also some of the other bodies that serve in that capacity. So I've got a few on here. I believe, Jesse, do you want me to walk through the ones we talked about, or do you want to queue those up? I see Bruce has got his hand up first. I want to allow him to have him jump in, but then if I'll turn it over to you to actually walk through it, because we discussed this a little bit earlier. Bruce, please.
Yeah, I think everybody remembers we've spent a fair amount of time on this agenda item in previous meetings talking about the intersectionality between DEI, environmental justice, and climate and water, and how working on the existing resolution, the future resolution, use similar language, similar definition, or the same definitions, which when I listened to Steve talk, I thought how important that is. So we've talked a lot about that. We haven't talked so much about intersectionality on grants, on the grant committee. And I think it kind of, the earlier comments by Steve and Jesse and everybody on DEQ teased that up for me. It gave me, I had questions on what funding mechanisms are available through other state agencies. We heard talk about the SIA grants that were ag through OWEB. We've heard of the WEED thing, which is an ag program through OWEB. Drinking water, source protection, who is the funding agency? Does I didn't want to put Steve on the spot, but does DEQ have other funding programs that might have some linkage with the OWEB mission? Certainly, I know that ODFW has some funding programs. So there's no single place, to my knowledge, there's no single place that we can look and say, these are all the funding sources statewide at an enterprise scale that have potential linkage for our for our partners. We've often had discussions when I was on the committee, the grant committee. Maybe we had funded a couple rounds of funding for a certain project, and it was running out. And is there any opportunity for funding extension for ongoing programs through other sources? So, to the extent that we can have some intersectionality between grants and water and climate in a program or a project that identifies the varying funding sources that are available throughout the state, and then of course it opens up a can of worms for federal programs and all that. But speaking just for state, I think that might be something we want to discuss.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, Bruce, and really appreciate that. Again, that customer service friendly approach. But this also sounds like almost a larger conversation. This would probably take a little bit more work and conversation with our partners. So with this it very much is tied into intersectionality, but Stephanie, I'll ask you, is this something that might be appropriate that we put on our list when we get to the good of the order of potential items for future discussion? Because I think it very much ties into that DEQ discussion, but other agencies as well, and give your team a chance to look at it and perhaps put this on a future agenda to discuss in more detail or talk about some of those tools or strategies to do that.
I think that's an excellent idea. And I would suggest, because it can get really overwhelming really fast. I mean, I think I've been a part of several interagency teams where we tried to create an inventory of all the grant programs we had. And it became so unwieldy as to not be useful. And so I think if we could just take it by, I would say either a subject matter chunk, like we could do funding for drinking water infrastructure and source water protection as a topic, just as an example, at a future committee meeting. I think that would be a reasonable chunk. Or funding for irrigation modernization. I think that might be another good one. So if there are topics like that might be something to think about. Funding for addressing emerging contaminants and non-point source pollution. So that, I think those are some examples, I think, of what would be bite-sized topics that we could digest together in one committee meeting, and that I think staff would have the bandwidth to prepare one topic per committee meeting. So absolutely, I think that's a great idea. And I think in terms of some of the conversations that many of us have been having with new partners, being able to speak in a coordinated fashion about services available from state government as an enterprise it's really important. It's not helpful, especially for new partners, to feel like programs are fragmented across several agencies. Even if they are, I think the more we can communicate that there is a suite of tools available, the better customer service we provide.
Thank you. Great comment. And Dan might have a comment on this, but it sounds to me there's two approaches. One is that big picture, some of those strategies for engaging. And second of all, is that by topic, that deeper dive. And so if folks want to think about that and provide some comments, Dan, please.
I was just going to acknowledge that it's, as we all know, it's not fixed, right? I mean, all these funding streams are very, very dynamic, and they're shifting with priorities in what our legislature at the state level, and of course, Congress at the federal level sets priorities. They push money out, and they leave, quite frankly, all these implementation agencies scrambling to get the job done. And it's changing all the time. So I like the idea of like a clearinghouse that has it all there, but there would be a lot of maintenance involved in that. And I just want to we all know that, but just to put it out there.
Yeah, great point. That's the other thing I was thinking of too, the maintenance piece, and whose job is that? Because we all know already that our team at OWEB is stretched thin. So Bruce, tying back in, what about queuing this up as a potential future item and giving Stephanie and her team a chance to look at some potential approaches, either an overview and getting some feedback from our other partners on some of the ways, some of those options that might be available, or looking at a potential deep dive by topic specific. Would either of those or that as an approach work for you?
Yeah, I think that works. And honestly, I'd like to have check in with the grants committee chairs and see what they're thinking, and if they think it would be of how we deal with the good concerns that Dan brought up. And so let's discuss that with staff and then see how to get it on a future agenda.
Yeah, sounds good. This even may be something, Stephanie, at your discretion, that would bump up to a full board discussion potentially in January as well. Excellent. Thank you for that, Bruce, and Dan, for your comments. Jesse, I know there are a couple items and a couple of folks who want to weigh in. I'll turn it over to you to lead that conversation.
Thanks, Jamie. So there's several things that have come up recently that maybe haven't come up in other committees yet, but we wanted to flag for the Climate and Water Committee, and know that it will probably come up with others. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie in a minute just to talk about updates related to HB 3409, the Natural and Working Lands, the Natural Climate Solutions Fund, and where that is at. And then we also wanted to briefly talk about the Environmental Justice Council mapping effort, and then turn it over to Renee and Eric Hartstein to talk about the Drinking Water Source Protection Program and how that is unfolding. And then lastly, I think Bruce already mentioned this, but just acknowledging the intersectionality between the climate resolution and the definitions that were adopted in there, the definitions that were adopted in the climate rulemaking, and how those are in line with what the equity resolution and statement is looking like, and the definitions that are adopted in there as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie because I know she has to run to another meeting.
Great. And actually, before I talk about 3409, I wanted to speak to a topic for the January meeting. We are going to have an agency partner come and talk about a new grant program within ODFW. So I think just, again, taking that in those bite-sized chunks, that's something that we're pretty excited about that's going to be coming in the January board meeting that addresses that feedback. So just wanted to share that. So House Bill 3409, just a little bit of background, it passed in the 23 legislative session, and it created, among many other things, a $10 million Natural and Working Lands Fund. OWEB is the fiscal agent for that fund. It also created 4 sub-funds, each of which is allocated to a different state agency. And the agencies are directed to work in collaboration with the Oregon Global Warming Commission to propose uses for those funds. And then the commission will direct OWEB in terms of how to transfer those funds among the 4 agencies for natural and working lands, carbon sequestration, and other climate mitigation activities. So the governor's office has convened the 4 agencies. They're providing leadership on this, which has been tremendously helpful. And the agencies are thinking about ways that we can get some early wins with the funds. Are there some existing programs that we can leverage to distribute some of these dollars to help demonstrate the need and the interest in carbon sequestration activities on natural and working lands? So OWEB submitted a proposal, or has come up with some ideas, I think is a better way to say it, at the direction of the governor's office. We have proposed to allocate dollars between the open solicitation grant programs for on-the-ground restoration work and for technical assistance, and then through the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program for technical assistance, conservation management planning and implementation, and working lands conservation easements and covenants. Noting that we're a responsive grant agency, and so it would depend upon the proposals that come in the door, but we would prioritize projects that serve tribes and EJ communities as directed in House Bill 3409, and we would fund projects that have an identified climate benefit. So that's just a little bit of an overview. We presented this at the Global Warming Commission meeting last week. It's all blurring together. But Monday. It was a preliminary presentation from the agencies with the governor's office, had a chance for some dialogue and feedback with the commission members. And then we're going to do some refining in response to that feedback. One of the key pieces of feedback for OWEB was to think about some priorities within the categories that I identified. Another important thing that we emphasized, because I think this continues to be a point of confusion, is that OWEB operates predominantly on a reimbursement basis to grantees. So we can allocate and commit dollars fairly early, but it may take multiple years for grantees to actually spend those dollars. And so that was something that we covered during our presentation as well. I am going to have to hop off for this other meeting, so great to see you all, and please feel free to reach out if you have follow-up questions, but I will leave it in Jesse's very capable hands to continue talking about 3409.
Thanks, Stephanie. Jesse, do you want to go ahead or see if there's any questions on that? Also, don't want to miss the EJ discussion as well, unless those 2 are integrated as part of that conversation.
No, but I'm happy to answer any questions that might have come up regarding 3409.
Thank you. Board members. Meg.
Thank you, Jamie, and Jesse. I think Stephanie probably said this, but I missed it. Which are the 4 agencies that are involved?
It's Oregon Department of Agriculture, Department of Forestry, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and OWEB.
Okay, and OWEB.
Those are the 4 different funds. Yeah.
Okay, and the Global Warming Commission's role is to kind of direct the distribution in kind of categorically, or?
Yeah, so the agencies are meant to come together with a proposal, but we take it to the commission and they have to approve whatever, how they would like to see the funds go. So they could say whether or not, what the agencies have proposed based on public comment or other things that they've received, if they would like to see something different. So they will have to approve it at one of their upcoming meetings.
I see. Okay, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And the meeting was on Monday, just this last Monday, and the recording should be available on the commission's website if you'd like to see the discussion and presentations from the other natural resource agencies.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? Jesse, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. So I presented on this briefly at the DEI and Environmental Justice subcommittee for the board, but there's some new information that's come available, so I wanted to just update this committee here. House Bill 4077 directed the creation of an environmental justice mapping tool. So the Environmental Justice Council over the past year has been talking about what the intent is behind that tool. And within the legislation, there were 4 different intended uses that were illustrated. And so the uses include, first, the tool can help to identify environmental justice communities within the state. Second, it could be used to help prioritize agency funding to address identified impacts on environmental justice communities. The tool could be used to conduct outreach and engagement activities with environmental justice communities to help inform the development and implementation of different environmental laws, administrative rules, or agency policies. And the tool could also be used to inform policy and program development, so helping to, for example, establish measurable goals for reducing environmental health disparities, or again, informing the development of different policies or laws or administrative rules. So those 4 potential intended uses were illustrated within the legislation, and the job of the Environmental Justice Council is to say, which of those uses do we prioritize for the agencies to start moving forward with development of the mapping tool? So during one of the council meetings in November, what they had decided is that they'd like to, they prefer that all of those be used as intended uses for the EJ mapping tool. But they said if they have to prioritize which of those intended uses, it would be the first 2. So being able to identify environmental justice communities in the state, and then prioritizing how we would prioritize funding or resource allocation. So where we prioritize agency funding to help address identified impacts on environmental justice communities. So there's a environmental justice mapping tool subgroup that's working on this that a number of different agencies are involved in. And one of the things that they're looking for is what they're calling use cases. So examples of ideas of how different agencies might want to use the mapping tool and say, for example, if OWEB wanted to say, we would love to see you create, use OWEB as a case study to help us think about how we might prioritize X or Y. So I wanted to just pose this to the committee that if you have any ideas, or if you want to add that as a discussion point at some point, or have some discussion with the DEI and EJ committee, there is the opportunity for us to come up with example use cases that we'd like that mapping subgroup to think through as they develop the mapping tool.
Great. Any comments from the board on that point? From board members? And really exciting opportunity. I mean, for the board has talked about expanding access, serving all Oregonians, and it really ties into this view and this focus. So really exciting work. Thank you, Jesse. Dan, you have a comment or a suggestion?
I do. I'm slow with my buttons this morning. I apologize. I think this is great, and I'm wondering how it's going to interact with sort of like the federal level tools. So like the climate and economic justice screening tool that's being used by the Biden administration to prioritize the putting out all the the big infrastructure dollars to EJ communities to meet the Justice 40 goals.
Yep.
Because it's sort of like that's the federal money is being prioritized by one tool, so hopefully there's going to be some consistency with the state tool, right? That's all. I'm sure you guys are all over it, but for other folks, just that they know there's a backdrop to that as well.
And I can share, I'm not directly involved in the mapping tool like subgroup. I sit as the agency's representative to the Environmental Justice Council. But what I do know is that the subgroup has really done, try to do like a deep dive into all of the existing tools that are out there at the federal level and other state levels to see where there might be, how to use that information, but also where there might be ways in which those tools are missing some environmental justice communities with Oregon. I know that's come up again and again, that some of the tools are not as great at recognizing just how diverse our state is in terms of like urban and rural communities. And so that I know has been a big discussion point with the tool development and looking at the existing tools that are out there.
Yeah, there's no perfect tool. That's a fact.
Always a
just
work in
like
progress.
models.
Thank you. And then Meg's got a question next. I also want to flag in terms of timing that we've got public comment coming up. So I want to save some time for that for Meg. And then Renee, if we can have a kind of an abbreviated presentation from you and Eric on the next. Meg, please.
Okay, thank you. I have never seen one of these mapping tools in action. And I'm wondering if there's some way for a complete novice to kind of get a better sense of how it works. I mean, I'm having a hard time even thinking about what, as a committee or a board member, what my input would be to these questions, because I just don't have a clear idea of that tool. And I mean, a general sense of how a tool like this works. I don't know if any board members or staffers have any suggestions about how a person could educate herself about how this works.
So Meg, I do know that as part of the initial discussions that the mapping subgroup and the council has engaged in, they had representatives from other states like California and Washington where they've developed similar tools come and present. So there should be some recorded webinars of those presentations
on the EJ Council.
Yeah, so I can
and that's a
find them
subcommittee
and send them.
Oh, that would be great.
It is.
I'd appreciate that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great point of wanting to see even the quote unquote draft version to be able to provide the comments and get a sense of what seems to work and what not.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. And now I want to turn over to Renee and Eric for the new OWEB grant program on drinking water resource protection. And apologies again, we're hoping to give you a little bit more time, but we're a little bit tight, but looking forward to your presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. Hartzine and I just texted back and forth, so I think I'll plow through content on this in the interest of time, but happy to answer questions. One plug I would say at the beginning is I think this program is a great example of the intersectionality that this entire agenda item is about. And it might be going to Bruce's point earlier about what are the range of different funding opportunities out there for different themes. This could be a fantastic case study on that. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we get into some of the details. So quick background, you'll actually have a written report on this for the January board meeting too. So House Bill 2010, the Omnibus Water Bill, did direct OWEB to develop a new drinking water source protection grant program. So the intent with the program really is to focus on land protection. So whether that is outright land acquisition, whether that's development of covenants, easements, and it's also there's space for loan repayment in the instances where a municipality or a water provider has already secured a particular parcel of land that helps to protect the source water area for their drinking water supply. So $5 million was provided for this program up front. $4 million is lottery bonds, and that's a new funding source for us. So we are working hard to learn how you administer lottery bond funding. That's paired with $1 million in general fund. So just kind of quick highlights in terms of where we are. In July, you all approved initiation of rulemaking for both drinking water source protection and the small grant rulemaking. We have finalized composition of a rules advisory committee, and we'll be convening that committee for the first time on January 10th of 2024. Right here, I want to call out for amazing staff who I'm calling the Drinking Water Source Protection Dream Team at this point. So Jesse, Eric Hartstein, Rachel Thompson, and Robin Meacher. This is absolutely, it takes a village situation because it's a very new and different type of program, given the range of different tools that could be utilized and also the different funding sources. So right now we're really leaning on a team of internal folks, but also, and this is reflected in the Rules Advisory Committee composition, a whole host of external partners who will engage directly with the program, but also are bringing really critical expertise in terms of what is the experience for water providers out there on the landscape who are facing these challenges with source water areas and potential water quality or water quantity concerns, technical expertise that we need from partner agencies such as DEQ, just as a great example, and also other funders of work such as this. So we have Business Oregon, we have DEQ representing the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. We have Business Oregon representing the Drinking Water SRF. We have our esteemed board member, Dan Brown, who's representing EPA, but also bringing the Drinking Water Providers Partnership lens. So really a great opportunity to think through how can this particular funding fill a gap or a complementary need relative to the other funding programs that are out there, but also leveraging the sister agency expertise that we absolutely need on this program. So we're excited to convene the RAC for the first time in January, and it is going to be a quick lift with the RAC process. The intent is to bring final rules for adoption by the board at the July 2024 board meeting. So pretty quick turnaround there. The other piece that I would mention we've been spending time on, and again, thanks to the subset of folks who I mentioned earlier, is a recruitment of an NRS, a natural resources specialist to really be the point for this program. So we're doing second interviews today, and hopefully we'll have someone in that seat sometime in early 2024. So one other piece that I would mention in terms of recent developments, we're working on building straw person administrative rules to present to the RAC in January of 2024. We'll need to do this incrementally, given the different complexities with this program, but also reaching out to statewide entities such as the Oregon Association of Water Utilities, League of Oregon Cities, Special Districts Association of Oregon, to understand what information do they have from their members about some of those very specific needs related to source water protection that we can leverage and account for as part of the RAC process. So again, I would put a plug in for really creating the opportunity to utilize this stand-up of the new program to maybe think through and have some case study opportunity with how do we integrate across different funding sources? How do we leverage, instead of having OWEB become the expert, leverage other subject matter experts, but in a way that I think is really complementary and helps to benefit all of the programs and ultimately the folks on the ground who are implementing these projects in the most effective way possible. So Hartstein, anything to add on that? Or Jesse?
You got it.
Excellent. Thank you for that presentation. Bruce, I see your hand. I will flag again that we're really tight on time. So
just a quick question for Renee. Renee, are you aware of whether anybody in the state is looking at the environmental and climate justice block grant program, that $20 million program that might be available? I was just thinking, when I was listening to the 5 million, I thought, another 20 would be nice.
I don't know, but I can definitely raise that with some of the other sister agencies. So Bruce, anything that you have on that, could you just shoot me a quick email about it, just as background? Thank you.
Yeah, we were talking about integrating resources before, and we've got just from a board member right there, a perfect example. Thanks, Bruce. Really appreciate that. And if there's follow-up from board members, questions on that, if we could defer those to the meeting, because I know we'll get at our board meeting in January an additional follow-up. Thank you so much, Renee and Eric, for that presentation. wanted to move on to public comment because we're really trying to integrate, and part of that community engagement piece, welcome more public engagement in our meetings. So first of all, I will ask directly, did we have any written comments for this meeting?
We did
yeah.
receive one. Oh, sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll let you speak to that, Jesse, but I did want to let you know that the one that Jesse's going to refer to, we received one and it is posted on our website.
Excellent. And Jesse, could you just mention the topic or what it's related to?
It's primarily focused on water and just how water has changed in the state and some of the water issues that our state is facing, and some of the possible options to deal with some of the changes that have occurred.
Thank you. And thanks, Nicole. Also, as mentioned, it's available on the website for folks to follow up. And something we're starting new with this meeting, and reason why I was rushing you all along to get to this point, is the opportunity for members of the public who've joined us to weigh in. So wanted to see if anyone wants to comment on the meeting or bring up potential other topics for this committee to discuss. I see we've got a couple members of the public. Go ahead and raise your hand with that feature, and then we'll invite you, give you 3 minutes to speak if you'd like to do so. Peggy Lynch. Would love to have your comments from the, it's like you're joining us representing the League of Women Voters. So go ahead and introduce yourself and please share your comments and weigh in.
Good morning, really quickly. Thank you very much for all the information. I always enjoy learning from this committee. It's you provide a whole lot of information. And the most important thing that the League has to say is that we are really interested in you continuing having this conversation around integrating the various agency works. That is just so important to try to make sure that we do that. And I want to really quickly share that, so the League has a member on the OHA Drinking Water Advisory Committee. I didn't hear OHA mentioned during your discussion of the source protection discussion, but I will tell you that serving from the Department of Forestry meetings, it was a Department of Forestry meeting where Nancy Webster of the Rockaway area that brought up this whole issue of the need for protection source. The last thing I wanted to share is that if you do not get the Regional Solutions regular reports, I would suggest that you do that, because in fact, we are doing our best to make sure that in the Regional Solutions reports, there is information about the various federal grant programs that are coming forward so that local jurisdictions and NGOs can learn about them. And I believe one of them is the $20 million grant that you mentioned. Thank you all for your work.
Hey, thank you so much for those comments and that great reminder of needing to lean into working together and leveraging the resources available to do the important work that OWEB and many of our state agencies are trying to do. Thank you so much. Any other members of the public? Okay, seeing none, thanks again, Peggy, for weighing in. Going on to the last item, the good of the order for this meeting and also potential topics for the next meeting. And first of all, I want to touch on two items that are process related, and then to open it up for discussion. And Bruce has already actually flagged an issue for future discussion that we mentioned when Stephanie was part of the meeting. In terms of process, wanted to ask the committee members whether we go an inch deep and a mile wide, or I guess, well, do we have more topics or spend more time on each topic? Longer meetings, more meetings to cover the topics. Just wanted a quick thumbnail weigh-in from board members to see if you think we should be, how these meetings are going. Are we spending not enough time on topics, too much time? Should we be covering more topics? Are there other ways to cover more topics? Thoughts, Bruce?
Yeah, I would just throw up a suggestion for a straw poll of the committee members. If we, one of the questions we run into when Jesse and Jamie and I talk about agenda is, you know, how much we can put in, how everything that Jamie was just talking about. We can either eliminate some, or the other option, if needed, based on the agenda, would the committee members be willing to have a 2-hour meeting rather than an 1.5-hour meeting? So
we can send out an email, but any initial thoughts, Steve, Lindsay, Meg, Dan? Steve, please. Meg, go ahead, just jump in.
All right, yeah, I can't find my hand on here. I think that's an interesting question. I've always found the meetings very, very useful, but as I think about it, I'm wondering if since we are the Water and Climate Committee, I wonder if we ought to really focus on water and climate. And if there's, go more in depth and maybe less broad, I guess the answer is. And no complaint here, but the OWEB strategic plan update is an update that would be given to any of our committees. It was not particular to our committee. And if it's and maybe ought to be something for the full board or things like that, things that are just news items that we will see again in the full board, or that you will be presenting to each of the board committees, then maybe that's something that doesn't need to be done. And we need to get more into the real climate and water issues. And anyway, that's just one thought.
Thanks. Meg.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm pretty happy with how you guys are structuring and running these meetings and providing support for them. And to answer your question, Bruce, if there was a reason, given the subject matter, for a longer meeting, I'd be able to do a longer meeting. I would not have any concerns about that. But I don't know. I like it's funny, Steve, to your point about water and, focusing on water and climate. It's true that we are that committee, but I think we benefit from the conversations we have that kind of do address the overlap among the committees. And because it really, the focus has results in what we produce, the policies and the rules and whatever we do, how we direct our efforts, taking into account all three committees or the work of all three committees. I don't know. I like that, continuing to keep all of the agencies' work in the forefront by what we're calling the intersectionality of the committee focus.
Well, I think there's space in between both those comments to be able to, for me to prompt and say, how does this relate to this committee, or how does this relate to water climate, and to kind of try to draw out more of that conversation so that there still is that intersectionality, which I think is really important, but also to Steve's point is, and how do we, what's our role in this discussion? Or how do we make sure we're integrating these other areas into our discussion? Lindsay, do you have comments?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with what has already kind of been said. I don't have any complaints on how things are going. I feel like we do give appropriate time to certain topics. I would not be opposed to a 2-hour meeting if there was something that warranted a little bit more time or a deeper dive. But I feel very comfortable with the topics, the pace, the level of depth.
Okay, thank you all for that. And I will restrain myself from making a joke about longer meetings and public meetings and government meetings, all that other stuff. I think everyone's thinking that, so I'll leave that there. But that's all very, very helpful. And then the other, and this is a key piece, really leaning into public engagement. So one of the things that we talked about, and Bruce and Jesse and I touched base before these meetings to kind of prep for them and kind of think through to optimize the flow. One of the questions that we were talking about is the public comment. Should that be at the top of the meeting? So if people have comments they want to weigh in that we can think about and that are topic specific, or is it better to have at the end? And so thoughts from committee members on whether you'd like to see the public comment section. Our board meetings have it in most cases up front, ahead of a lot of conversations, but would you rather see them earlier in the meeting or later in the meeting?
Earlier in the meeting.
I agree. Yeah. I agree with Meg, just to so folks don't necessarily have to sit through our whole meeting if they don't want to.
You're suggesting that's not pure joy, but that sounds good. That was one of the things we were grappling with. Steve, any thoughts from you as well?
No, I think earlier in the meeting, or if there's if a member of the public has a comment on a specific item, maybe that could be put in right at or before that particular item.
Yeah, that was something we were thinking about as well. And then the question is, though, how, if someone wants to comment on each item, how do you divvy that up? But we'll chew on that a little bit. But again, overall, 4 members of the public, we're really delighted to have you join, and it really informs and enriches the discussion. So we'll find ways to better engage the public in our discussions. Really appreciate that. And then with just the remaining couple minutes, other topics for the future. We've already integrated Bruce's suggestion on the intersectionality of grants. Other topics?
Somebody raised earlier in the meeting whether what we just did today with respect to DEQ would be useful to this committee for that relationship with other agencies, and I do think that is a helpful thing to keep in front of our brains. So I would be supportive of that being, maybe at each meeting a different relationship agency.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. And actually, Jesse and Stephanie were a step ahead of all of us, because that was something that came up and so they had talked about doing that over time, and it helps to just better inform us all in that intersectionality between state agencies. So great comment, and that's what we're looking at potentially incorporating going forward. But appreciate that. Other topics? Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, seeing none, I'll just do a quick good news, bad news for the committee. COP28 just finished, as most everybody knows. They identified $200 billion investment in nature-based solutions for climate. The bad news is they also found total global financing for activities directly harming nature last year was close to $7 trillion. We've got a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do, but as we better leverage funds and better partner, as we're talking about in this meeting, we'll be able to maximize the bang for our buck on those impacts. And then just one last comment, Jesse, really enjoyed the visual. I thought visuals really helpful in the presentation. So when you walked us through as that example, I thought that was great, because otherwise us thinking of, being told, go to the website and look for it, being walked through it was super helpful. So I wanted to give that feedback as well. We've run through on time. Thank you all for your engagement. The OWEB team, as always, phenomenal job on preparing and presenting. It's great to see all the great work you're doing. Board members, thanks for your time and your commitment to our state and engaging in this process to make sure we're all doing our bit to take care of our other Oregonians and also our environment and our natural resources. So thanks all, and thanks Peggy for joining our public comment session as well. Take care, everyone. We'll see you at our next